things. In the bulletin, of course, I danced around the issue of the change in crop potential, which I'd like to have a handle on, but I don't. The reduction in crop potential, of course, reflects the amount of grower disinvestment in the blueberry crop, and that's something I'd like to have a better handle on, but I don't. I made a comparison of production decreases since the price collapsed in the report. That's a rough barometer on the impact of the price crisis across the different regions. As we get a couple more observations on crops, it'll be a little better barometer on that. That was worthwhile for a couple of reasons. One is that the decrease production in Maine and in Canada are almost exactly the same. That's important because in Maine, they've got a picture that they are victims of the Canadian expansion. And they were central in having frozen blueberries and wild blueberries included in the recent US investigation on blueberry imports. So Maine is feeling hard done by, but judging by what's happened to crops since the price collapse, their experience is the same as the overall average Canadian experience, and it doesn't hurt for them to know that. If you go down to the provincial level, again, Maritimes had the largest decrease in production. Quebec had the best. Maine had what was average for the wild blueberry crop. But if you break the Maritime provinces down into 3 provinces, really Nova Scotia, by those numbers, had the worst experience. I'm told that my numbers may have been out a little bit on that. And so there may be some revisions on that in the May report. But I think it was worthwhile. It didn't surprise me that Nova Scotia would have had the largest decrease for 3 reasons. The Maritimes as a whole have had the largest price decreases over the slump. Nova Scotia had that lengthy period of disappointing yields, which didn't help anybody's balance sheet. And secondly, at the time of the 2016 Census of Agriculture 5 years ago, Nova Scotia acreage had already fallen. And at that time, I think we were the only blueberry production region in the world that had falling acreage. So I thought that was worthwhile noting. Two other things about my business that I will report about the Acadia Blueberry Price Bulletin, and then we'll open it up for questions. The first thing about my business, maybe some of you have some comments on this before we end today, is the timing of our publications. We put out 3 bulletins a year, one the end of February, one the end of May, and one in mid-July. In the old days, somebody might have said there's something retarded about this, in that then we go from mid-July until the end of February. We go 7.5 months when you don't hear from us. When we first came out, we had a fall, a spring, and a summer report. That fall report moved into the winter when the Maine settlement prices started to be delayed. I told you about that earlier. And also, if I waited till after Christmas, boy, then I was teaching, and it tended to be that I didn't get the thing out until the smooth winter study break came around in February. For the first academic year in a long, long time, I didn't sign up to teach anything in 2021, and I may not teach again. So that's kind of gone. So that academic demand doesn't interfere with when we put out the report. I'll tell you this, another problem with this timing is that my memory is in decline, and those 7.5 month breaks are a long time, and there might be a year when I simply forget to do the report. The other thing I want to mention about our bulletin, important. It could be a small, very moderate price increase for the bulletin coming up. We'll see about that. I'll be very happy to answer any questions you might have on any of that. Is our MC there?
Yeah, we're here. I guess we can open it up to some conversation if anyone wants to unmute themselves or.
No questions. I love it.
Might be off easy.
Terry, you must have some questions.
Well, I think the growers want to know what you figure they're going to get paid this year for the crop.
It's a little early to give a number, but I think it'll, I mean, I'm saying it's gonna be a good price. You can take my credibility to the dump if you don't get a good price this year.
What's a good
I
price?
will, you know, it would take something like a financial crisis to derail the outlook for a good crop. I mean, I don't want to tell you it was a good price, but I said you can have a good crop, you can have a very good crop, and it will still be a good price. I told you earlier about what that speaker, a guy that I have a high regard for, he talked about, you know, the outlook for the 2021 crop is strengthening. He didn't say it stays firm. He said it is strengthening. And then on 2022, he said, even if the pack goes up a lot, the outlook will remain very good for 2022. Gee, he's a guy that knows a lot more about those things than me. We try to, I mean, we'll listen and we'll put together what information we can. That mid-July copy of our bulletin, we always try to say what the price is going to be. And we only, the price is going to come out within weeks, but everybody's very interested at that time of year. And we certainly have a shot every year at suggesting what the price will be. Well, that's a very short-term forecast and usually very dependent on what the crop will be. But heck, this year, no, on the one hand, this one, on the other hand, that. The outlook is for a good price. Oh, we haven't even settled on what the 2020 price should be yet, right? I can speak to that more strongly. It should be more than 75 cents.
And can you justify a little bit why the difference between the wholesale price and the retail price, or the grower price, I should say? Like what makes up that spread? Like you're suggesting it should be stronger than 75 cents. Some of your report, I think, suggested it could be as high as 90 cents. Yeah. How does the grower price come out of that price of the
the work that I do, you know, when you talk about the price, growers want to know, is this a good price? Am I getting paid right? How does this price compare? I mean, there's two things about prices that's pretty simple, not too technical. You compare it with what other growers are getting. You compare it with what the processor is getting. And those provide two good bases to work from and evaluate your price. In the case of the Maine Cherryfield price, it was 60 cents. It was 79 cents Canadian. Blueberry prices are on the nickel, so that the equivalent to that would be 80 cents. And there's a chance, and I hope I don't say anything that reduces the chance. The Maine growers are hopeful of a top up. Prices are strong enough that they should be given a top up. Once they get a top up, then the equivalent price here wouldn't be 80 cents. It would be at least 85 cents.
That'd be good. Is there any other crop apart from the high bush blueberries that could impact our pricing for this 2021 season? Like that.
Yeah, as far as other crops are concerned, nothing that I know of. People often speak of the bilberry crop in Europe as being a big determinant. I never ever could pick up much influence in the prices that I look at. I never had very good statistics on bilberries, anything like that. But still, I didn't feel that there was any strong influence coming from that direction in terms of hitting the price. Maybe there were some parts of the European market where it would hurt sales. I used to have a model on prices, and you know, you would normally have a substitute crop in there. And I had strawberries, because strawberries is such a big element in the frozen fruit market. And it was statistically significant, but at the end of the day, it never had much influence. Maybe it would influence the blueberry price by a cent or half a cent, but it was that small a thing.
So it's pretty much the high bush then.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt, high bush is your number one competitor for sure. The premiums are over high bush are up this year, but high bush are getting good prices themselves. And the crops are going up. But at the same time, I think something very encouraging in the market right now is it's with a weak supply of wild, with wild representing a smaller portion of the supply out there in today's world than ever before. There's a premium on wild, and there's a certain segment of the market today that prefers wild. And if everybody knew a lot more about blueberries, that segment would be even larger, wouldn't it? I mentioned earlier that, gee, we've sold a lot of, the amount of wild blueberries eaten in overseas market in the last 5 years was twice what it was 10 years ago. So a lot of people have eaten wild blueberries for the first time, and you would like to think that now there's that increased awareness and that appreciation, that taste for wild, and you'd like to see that the overseas demand will increase. Well, we'll see that when we see what the relationship is between their sales volumes and their prices going in years ahead.
Anybody else there?
Rob McMillan must have a good question. No, not getting anything out of him.
And I don't see any questions.
Anything in the chat box, Megan?
Nope, nothing in the chat.
You've got 2 other speakers tonight, Terry.
Yes, we do. Yeah, so we can certainly move on to the next group of speakers if there's no other questions for Dave. I guess everyone's just so excited at the prospect of a 90-cent berry that they've forgotten about everything else
They've
now,
all gone out to invest their money.
or count it.
Oh yeah, or hopefully make good investments in their crops.
No, we certainly want to thank you for your presentation, Dave. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Terry. Next time I'll bring along more charts and so on. I was watching some very polished presentations from that Highbush meeting this afternoon. But anyway, I think hopefully there's no mysteries there in my central message. And those people that read our bulletins early May, they'll hear from us again.
Yeah, and if there's anything that you wanted to forward on to us, all these presentations are being recorded. So if you had some extra information you wanted to send to me, we can include it in the what's.
Yep.
So anyone look at that later.
Okay.
All right, so up next, if he's ready, we have Dr. Scott White from Dalhousie Faculty of Agriculture and Gavin Graham. He's with the New Brunswick Department of Agriculture, and they're going to do a tag team with the latest practices that may influence problem weed control in wild blueberry fields. So welcome, Scott and Gavin.
Okay, thank you very much, Megan.
A little early, but hopefully that's all right.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Terry, I'll just share my screen, I think. Is that sound good?
Yep, that sounds good.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I didn't hear Gavin say hi, but I assume he's there.
I'm here as well, yes.
Yeah.
Waiting for a spot to get in there. So
Yeah.
while Scott's loading up there, I think just like to thank everyone for joining us here today. We'll kind of do this a little bit collaboratively in the presentation as well too. So it's going to bounce back and forth a little bit. So if you got any questions as we're going through things, feel free to jump in and add in any kind of comments there. Scott will be the one that's running the presentation, and I'll be kind of watching the chat a little bit as well too. So feel free to dump your questions in the chat there as well. So as Scott will fire it up, and I'll let him take the first few slides for you guys. But feel free to reach out with questions though. I think that's going to be the best part of this presentation, is if we're able to get some back and forth going on this.
Yeah. So you just let me know, Terry, you should be seeing a presentation there now. Does that?
Yeah, you're looking good on my end, Scott.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can see it, Scott.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, like Gavin said, good evening, everyone, and really appreciate the invite and the opportunity to chat weeds and blueberries. And as Gavin mentioned, we're going to him and I are each going to bounce back and forth between some different weeds. And we certainly do encourage questions in real time, and I'll leave it to Terry and Megan to keep us on time if needed. But think of us leading a discussion more so than giving a presentation, and please jump in with questions at any time, okay? Okay, so we're basically gonna build this around the most common weed species in Lowbush blueberries in Nova Scotia, and then also sort of end with some up and coming species or the future top 10 potentially, but this is based on the weed survey that I presented before. So you can see the 165 fields that we've sampled here in Nova Scotia, and that's the data set that we're kind of drawing from. And so what we're going to start with first is just some general comments on the top 10 most common weeds, and then we'll see what we're left with time after that, and then we'll talk about some additional species after that if we have time. Okay, so based on the weed survey results, these are the 10 most common non-blueberry plants in Lowbush blueberry fields in Nova Scotia. And I've got them ranked here by relative abundance and percent of fields with the weed. The relative abundance, I haven't showed this before, but that's a unitless number that factors in the percentage of fields that have the weed, as well as the percent field coverage of a weed and the density of the weed to come up with a ranking of what are the most important species. And it's really the most important number to look at in terms of trying to assess how important one weed is relative to another. Okay, and so you can kind of see the top 10 there, and we're just going to kind of touch on each of those. And again, by all means, please jump in with questions at any time. Okay, so just kind of starting quickly with sheep sorrel here. Here you can see the trends in the numbers at the top of the screen there of what's gone on with sheep sorrel in blueberry fields in Nova Scotia since the early 80s. And so you can see basically most of the numbers have gone up over time. And so from 85 to 90 to now 98% of the fields surveyed have this weed. And then you can see the big jump in numbers for that weed species has been the percent field coverage of sheep sorrel, as well as the density of sheep sorrel. And that's related to the growth habit of this weed species. And so you can see a picture of a sheep sorrel there in the lower left corner. And that's one of the above ground rosettes with the very distinct sort of two lobes at the base of the leaf there that gives it a very distinct look. But underneath the soil, this plant is spreading by a creeping root system. And so each individual plant is potentially hundreds or thousands of those above ground rosettes. And that's what explains the numbers that we're seeing in the weed survey. So sheep sorrel is in just about every field it can get in at this point. What's going on now is it's just increasing in density and field coverage in the fields that it's in. And that's what's going on with the weed survey numbers there. So most folks know how to identify sheep sorrel. The dead giveaway of it in most fields is in the middle of the summer when you see these red flowers, sprouting crop year, doesn't matter. It'll be the same timing, but that would be, you know, a dead giveaway for sheep sorrel are these red flowers. And then in the spring of the sprout year, before the blueberries come up, or in the fall of the crop year, just before or after you've pruned the field, you can also see the vegetative sheep sorrel rosettes down at the soil surface. So probably the two best times to look for sheep sorrel in terms of being able to make a management decision for this weed is very early in the spring of the sprout year, or just prior to or just after mowing in the crop year, because those are the two timings where you're going to be able to get a treatment down to potentially deal with that weed species. Okay, now historically with sheep sorrel, Velpar has worked, but in Nova Scotia, we have documented Velpar resistance in this weed species. And I mean, for far as I know, for most growers, Velpar is kind of a no-go for sheep sorrel, and in Nova Scotia is not really providing much control. But Gavin, perhaps you want to just comment. That's not necessarily the case outside of Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I'd just say that we're probably still getting a little bit better luck with our Valpar treatments on sheep sorrel in New Brunswick. Like I would say, we're not full on resistance, but maybe trending towards it. You'll see a little bit of the data later on there too. But I would still, if you're a grower in New Brunswick, if you haven't done the full Valpar rate yet and you're having sheep sorrel issues, I'd still consider going with the higher end of the rates just to look at that. Just one question that came up in the chat, Scott. Just a question on the fields. Do you have an estimate on how many fields were in Cape Breton when you're doing your survey?
I knew that question would come up. No, that was the only place I couldn't get to. We ran out of resources and time and energy in the third summer. So I got everywhere in the province except Cape Breton. So it honestly was on the to-do list for the weed survey, but it just became impractical in the last year. So 0 fields in Cape Breton, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then I can speak to authority as well too, because I probably had a little bit more experience with it as well. But in my screening work with authority, we've had some early success with sheep sorrel. Like it looks really impressive, that 2 weeks after an application, but you will see the sheep sorrel recover from those treatments and grow back in. So it may not be the best long-term solution or a standalone solution, but it might be something to consider, especially if you are having the issues with Valpar. And both of us, between Scott and myself, I think Ultim has been extremely variable for sheep sorrel. Ultims can be variable on a lot of different species, but sheep sorrel specifically, there's plots where, even from, one corner of the trial to the next corner, it's 20% versus 80% control sometimes. So it's really, really variable. But if you're putting into a program, you might be able to get some control out of it as well too. The Ignite is one that would be similar to authority, but probably maybe a little bit weaker as far as end control. Like you will get a good quick burn down, but the recovery is a little bit faster. And then I think Spartan will be the one that Scott will cover here next. But
yeah, so for me, Spartan's been the most consistent performer on this weed across sites at the moment. So I've kind of showed these data before, but you can see here again the Spartan knocking the sheep sorrel back with a spring sprout year application and keeping the density relatively low compared to not doing anything at all or relying on Ultim or option there. So most growers that have been trying Spartan have been having pretty decent luck with it on sheep sorrel, particularly if they're doing a spring sprout year application. But there is there's a bit of a crop injury risk there if you run too late. But I'm going to let sort of Gavin jump back in because he was able to get a timing trial out last year that will provide some clarity on application timing with this product for sheep sorrel.
yeah, so based on what Scott's results were with Spartan, I did want to take a look at some different application timings just to see. We'll mention it a little bit later in the presentation, but our Spartan label, we do have the window from that fall application window for after harvest for bunchberry control, and then we have that early spring window for bunchberry control. So that leaves a lot of time in between there just to decide when we should be targeting with sheep sorrel. And then the other thing with sheep sorrel, it's basically green and growing pretty much all year. I'm sure if you dug out the snow and got a little bit of sun on that sheep sorrel now, it would start growing pretty quickly. So it's something that I think we have an opportunity there to take advantage of that. So basically with this trial looked at the 5 different application timings are represented by the pictures down there below. But basically that A application timing was right after harvest or a few weeks after harvest. You can see a little bit of sheep sorrel hiding below the canopy there. And I think that's the biggest risk of that kind of after harvest application for sheep sorrel, just that you've got all that old stem material there and it's really hard to target the weed. The next timing I looked at was after mowing treatment. So went in, got the grower to mow the area and then went in and applied things later. The risk with that application timing is just regrowth. If you don't get your mowing done early enough, or if we get a bit of a backwards fall, which tends to happen, you may not get that regrowth of the sheep sorrel in time to get the best control. And then C, D, and E are all sprout year application timing. So looking at pretty early May, kind of a typical pre-application window, and then a post-application. So letting those blueberries come out of the ground, more of that kind of typical Spartan timing if we were going after bunchberry. The thing I'll mention as far as cropper injury goes, no real difference between the plots except for that E or that post-emergent application with the Spartan. That is when we got some fairly significant injury. I'd say about 20% injury on the blueberries, but they did recover by the end of the crop year. You couldn't tell the difference then, and then we took yields on these plots and no difference in yields. So there was a little bit of injury from that later application timing, but the plants did recover. So as we look at the next slide here, Scott, we'll get into the data based off of this trial a little bit. So here's one of my kind of standard data reports here, but the things to key in and on is the top two lines. So the top line is the untreated control, so obviously no control there, but the next line down would be Velpar by itself. So that's where you can see getting about that 60% control. So I think we're on that tipping point to resistance would be the way that I kind of term it in New Brunswick for a lot of our fields. The other thing I'll mention about this field area as well too is the sheep sorrel pressure was relatively low. So it wasn't the complete plastered situation that Scott had some pictures of. It was a pretty low amount of sheep sorrel in this trial. So you can see from any of those application timings as far as sheep sorrel control, basically coming out to be about the same. You know, a little bit of variability depending on when things were applied potentially early on in that sprout year, but by the time we got to the crop year, really no difference in those application timings. So basically what my recommendation would be for most growers now is just to go out and have a look at your fields. If you go out after harvest, you know, go out to your field, look down. If you can look down and see sheep sorrel, maybe that's the time to get out the sprayer, just because I think growing conditions are a little bit better then. If you do the mow a little bit earlier and you know, want to put that application on a little bit later, the opportunity is there, but you want that regrowth. You know, you want that actively growing sheep sorrel to control it. And then honestly, I think the timing that we should be thinking about is that early sprout year application ahead of your Velpar applications. Typically, just, you know, as soon as you can kind of get in that field and that sheep sorrel starting to grow again, I think that's the time that we should really be targeting this, just because that injury risk that might come up afterwards. So I think we'll move to the next slide there, Scott, unless there's some questions.
Yeah, so any questions on sheep sorrel while we're...
Yeah, so we had one question pop up there about mowing and spraying in the spring. I haven't done any of the trial work on the spring mowing. I think it depends on how low you're mowing and how aggressive you're getting with that spring mow. Basically, when I was doing the fall work, it was probably 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks before the sheep sorrel would recover enough that you'd feel confident in getting the spray. I think in the spring, that's probably going to be a little bit shorter, but I'd still, if you're thinking about doing it in the spring, I think your windows might get a little too tight. So it might be, but it depends on your kind of local conditions a little bit. But if you can get the mow on early enough in the spring and some time for some regrowth before the blueberries come out, I think it's something to think about if you can make it work.
Yeah, you could also consider if you haven't mowed going into the spring, you won't have any blueberry leaves, so you could apply the Spartan before you do your spring mow as well. Maybe give yourself a week between spraying and mowing to let it get into the sheep sorrel, but that would be something you could consider there as well.
Yeah, no, I think there still is quite a bit of work to do, you know, trial wise, as far as making the recommendation and kind of nailing down the best time to put these things out. And I do have a little bit more work on the go trying to address that as well too. And then another question about curb in the fall, the sprout year to get any sheep sorrel missed in the spring. Scott's probably got a little bit more experience with that.
Yeah. I mean, it would certainly be, it should be effective, but curb to me, excuse me, has always been a bit variable on sheep sorrel in my experience. So it works well at some sites and it doesn't work at other sites. For the price of curb, I wouldn't use it to clean up a little bit of sheep sorrel. I think you can get through the crop year if it's not super bad and nail it with something cheaper after you get through the crop year. But certainly if it was really bad and you thought it was going to be a problem, fall sprout year curb is pretty much your only choice at that point anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I
and
would just make sure it's well justified, because I'd really only use curb for fescue if I could. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind with curb is your application conditions, right? Like it's one that you know, it's a little bit finicky in the fall conditions just to make sure that you're getting the application conditions right. You know, if you're not going to wait for the things to cool off, and you want to make sure the soil temperature is down far enough that you're not going to lose the product right away too. So so it's something that maybe, you know, start with one field or limit your acreage that you're going to be looking at a curb application to. I find that don't get too ambitious with the curb application if you try to keep track of how many acres you're going to do in the fall. So there's only so much time in that best window, and try to get the fields treated the best way. So because it is a pretty expensive product that way. So
No, it
Yep.
should help, but just make sure that it's worth the investment for a weed like sheep sorrel when you know you're going to be able to hit that thing again right after harvest with some other treatments. So
Yep. So the next weed that we'll be covering off, if there's nothing else coming up in the chat there, is Poverty oatgrass. So
yeah,
I
it
think
looks good, Gavin. Go for
Yep.
it.
Yep. So you'll have to click for me, Scott.
Oh, you're making me multitask.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you can see the relative you know, abundance of Poverty oatgrass, and basically staying fairly stable throughout the 3 survey years. You know, maybe increasing a little bit and decreasing a little bit, but staying fairly static. I think that's kind of the general message with Poverty oatgrass as well too. Like I think it's one of those grass weeds that's always going to be there. So you can see the tufted perennial grass. So you can see the tuft in the bottom left-hand corner there. The easiest way to identify this one is looking at the leaves though. So where the leaves are attaching to the stem, you can see that little tuft of hairs. That's basically where the leaf joins the stem there, and that's the easiest way to identify this one, is that little tuft of hairs. And then when you're coming first thing in the spring, when the plant's overwintered, you can see the curliness to those old leaves. Those old leaves, as they are kind of dried out after the winter time, they tend to curl up and get that kind of matted look to them in the picture on the right hand side there. So that's the other giveaway that I usually look for to help identify Poverty oatgrass when we're in the field. So when we move to the next slide there, you can see the what it looks like in the field. You might have to turn off your pointer there to click slides there. Yeah, so you can see the Poverty oatgrass infestation as you're coming out in the summertime. So you can see the kind of hay look to the field. That's usually typical of what Poverty oatgrass would be. And then you can see the seeds there, that it has that twisted on the seeds, and that's the other way to help identify this one. Not a real prolific seed producer, but it produces enough to spread around. The good thing about this grass is that it's not really overly competitive in our production system. So you see the, you know, you need to get the, you know, there's not a high level of competition for nitrogen within the paper that's there. And honestly, I think those smaller to moderate populations are almost beneficial for you as a grower, just because, you know, they're typically in bare spots. They're typically in areas where there's not much blueberry cover. And if you take out the Poverty oatgrass, something else is going to come into that hole. And that's where we see the sheep sorrel or fescue or some of those other more aggressive weeds kind of sneak in there and get a foothold. So honestly, Poverty oatgrass may be not one to chase too hard. But if you are having issues with it, you know, this is one species that I think Velpar resistance is fairly common. That I think historically Velpar worked a lot better on Poverty oatgrass, but we have kind of selected for resistance on this one. But if you are looking to control, venture and post are still the most effective treatments that we have for this grass species.
any questions on Poverty oatgrass?
Yeah, so if we don't have anything on Poverty oatgrass, I think we'll move on to haircap moss is the next one. So you can see from the survey information there that I don't think that they bothered.
It wasn't
counting.
tracked in the previous.
It wasn't
ones,
tracked
yeah.
in the previous surveys. I think moss is a weed that we typically, historically at least anyway, didn't really worry too much about. We just thought it was there in the field. It's growing low. It's not really taking much. But I think more recently we've really started to key in on this one and maybe start to deal with it maybe a little bit more. You see the picture on the bottom left hand corner, the kind of star shaped, green leaves on this one. Keep in mind, it's not a plant. It's a primitive plant, so it doesn't have the vascular system, so a little bit of different system. And you can see on the right hand picture the spore apparatus. So each of those little balls will be releasing spores, and that's how this plant spreads. So it's one of those kind of quirky ones that we'll run across. Typically, you see it start to get established in the wetter areas of fields, but it's not always associated there too. So the easiest time to try to find this one again, it's kind of like sheep's furl, is that fall after mowing is really the best time to go out there and have a look at your fields, just because you can pick these patches out a little bit easier. You can see, where these patches are, and it is a pretty patchy weed as well too. It's not, unless you got something that's really got out of hand with it, it tends to be patch here, patch there, patch there. As far as control options, we've only recently really started to look at things for control, but Chateau is the one that is the most recommended treatment for this one, and pretty good success with it. You see the bottom right hand picture there, that's a picture from one of my plots. In general, I think control has been pretty good, but you might see some regrowth. So you see the dead moss sitting there, and then a little bit of regrowth coming in there. But honestly, I think growers are doing a better job on moss control than what I had in my plots, at least anyway. And I really didn't have too much experience with Chateau on it either. So it's one, I think the growers are getting better luck than what I had in my trial work too, and that's always a good thing. But just to keep in mind that if you are having some issues with moss, or you think it's an issue, that the Chateau in that fall window is your best option. So if there's no questions,
Any questions on moss? Okay. Okay, we'll jump in into my favorite weed, fescue. So this is just the trends in the data with the fescue over the last 3 weed surveys. So I want to highlight something with these numbers. So you can see from 1985 to 2001, every single number declined. So the percentage of fields with this weed basically dropped 50%, the percent field coverage dropped 6-fold, average density dropped so much that you could barely find a clump of fescue in a blueberry field in 2001 is what these data are saying. And you can see the relative abundance there. But then if you look from 2001 to 2019, is the exact opposite, and this weed has basically exploded. So it's in more fields than it's ever been in. It's occupying more field area than it's ever occupied, and its density is much higher than it used to be. And that's because it's moving around on equipment. And so I'm going to say that a number of times tonight. I know I sound like a broken record with it, but fescue does not have a windborne seed. The seed falls within 2 meters of each of those clumps is where the seeds go if nothing else happens. And so this weed does not move from 13% of fields to 75% of fields on its own. It's us that are doing that. And I really I will reiterate this till the day I die, is something that we got to get a handle on, because we'll run out of herbicides too fast if we just keep moving this weed around. So I'm going to come back to that again here shortly, but we can't do this every 20 years, double or spread this weed and expect to be able to manage it. This weed will win in the end, for sure. Okay, and now most folks know fescue by now, huge clumps almost as big as your head, very fine thread-like leaves. You can see a couple of them there. This is a typical fescue infestation in summer. You tend to get these sort of, the inflorescences I kind of find make a bit of a fan shape, and they always lean with the wind, and so you can always tell the dominant wind direction when there's fescue in the field, because it's almost like all the seed heads are kind of nudged in the direction that the wind will be blowing. And then you can see the seed head up here in the far right, mature seed head ready to start dropping seeds. And then this is a bunch of fescue in a mowed field, or what you would typically see in early spring as well. So this grass is quite readily visible and most of the year. It doesn't tend to brown back in the fall. It's pretty much green 12 months a year, kind of like sheep sorrel. So it's pretty easy to spot. And so if you were looking for fescue and trying to make a decision, sprout year, you want to be out there right out of the gate as early as possible in the spring. If you want to potentially have to do a fall sprout year curb, scout the field in September and October to assess that. And then in the crop year, get out there just before or just after mowing, and that will let you see the fescue, let you size it up and whether or not it's worth an application of a herbicide or not.
Scott, just one question came in there. Do you have any theories on why the fescue reduced
Thank
between
you. I
85
meant
and
to say
2001?
that. That is Velpar, and the efficacy that Velpar used to have and the efficacy that it no longer has. Largely Velpar, but also Synbar. But that dramatic drop from 85 to 01 is I think largely credited to Velpar. So in some work that I've done with a friend in Quebec recently, and he did all the hard work because he's the molecular biologist, but we have found a mutation in fescue that does give resistance to Velpar. And so basically what we did what happened is we selected for resistant Velpar resistant fescue between 1985 and 2001, and then spread it around from 2001 to 2019. That's the story those numbers tell. We don't want to see that same story, but have Velpar replaced with Curb or Option and Altum or Flazosulfuron in the next 20 years, because there might not be something new in the next 20 years to solve this problem the next time it comes around like that. So that's a testament to the initial efficacy of Velpar, but what happens to a herbicide over time when you basically run her dry and select for resistance. It's how fast the weeds can pop back up. I'm going to say thank you, Chris Henneberry, for asking that question, because I really did mean to say that. So path forward for fescue management. So what I want to do just tonight is just touch on what's currently registered and some thoughts on what we do have registered right now that can kind of help with fescue. And then we'll touch on a couple of newer products that should be coming along within the next year or so, and how they're going to fit into what we already have available for managing this grass. So the things that we have available right now that do have impact on this grass and do give you some return on investment, at least to some extent, is potentially Synbar in the spring of the sprout year, Option or Option plus Altum in the spring of the sprout year, Curb in the fall of the sprout year or fall of the crop year, and then potentially Casseron in the fall of the crop year. Okay, now I just have a few comments on each of these, and Gavin's going to jump in as well, because there's some surprisingly different responses to some of these between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So the first one for sure is I want to mention is Synbar. I don't know what everyone's experience is as a grower right now, and it's probably fairly diverse, but in my experience across a lot of plots, I would consider Synbar to be highly variable on fescue. So in my experience in Nova Scotia, you sprayed Synbar, but there's still a lot of fescue left behind in the plots. And what I would see more often than not is a reduction in fescue growth, but not a reduction in fescue density. And so a lot of recovery from it getting into the later part of the sprout year. And then the plots are usually not very pretty come the crop year. In the Velpar resistance work we did, or that we're still working on, the mutation that gave resistance to Velpar does not give resistance to Sinbar. And so our best data to date suggests that fescue in Nova Scotia is resistant to Velpar, but it's not resistant to Sinbar. And so the reason I think Sinbar is variable or doesn't work in all fields is just because of how big these plants get. So the longer fescue's alive, the more it tillers, and you can see the image I got up there in the upper right corner, a little Gatorade bottle next to a single fescue clump there. Clumps of this grass get huge and they get big fast. This is a very aggressively tillering grass. And when you're looking at individual plants, like you see in that image, that's thousands of tillers. I mean, potentially hundreds of thousands. You're looking at thousands of growing points, almost limitless regenerative capacity following injury. The basic rule of thumb in weeds is the bigger plants are, the harder they are to kill. It's a simple rule, but it's an unfortunate harsh rule when it comes to fescue, because this grass gets big fast, and I think that's having a big impact on our ability to kill it with some of the registered treatments. But Gavin has a lot of experience with Sinbar in New Brunswick as well.
Yeah, so I'd say my experience with Sinbar's maybe been a little bit better. Like I think most of the growers that are still using it for fescue have most times have done a pretty good job with it. I think it's the size of the plant thing that Scott was mentioning there. I think that's a big thing that comes into play. And then hair fescue gets going really fast early on in the spring. So I think it's one of those, if you're delaying applications or waiting a little bit too long to get on that Sinbar application, I think you're not doing yourself any favors. So it's something to think about is application timing, and then good mowing. And then the other one that had a trial on it, it was more on option earlier, but it was burning was the other one that I had in some burn versus non-burn fields, and you could tell a difference between the control levels between those two areas. There's one question that came up in the chat about Casseron, and I think we'll maybe hold that until we get to the Casseron section. I think Scott might have some comments and might be able to deal with it, but if he doesn't
I was
answer
thinking,
we'll do it then. Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions on Sinbar, we'll move on to the next slide then.
For option and Altum, I personally still think this is a pretty solid performer for sprout year suppression. So its efficacy is also linked to how big the fescue tufts are, but some years it works better than others. In this plot, I had really good efficacy with option and Altum, and it really knocked the fescue back. It didn't kill it outright. It did come back for the crop year, and then that's what most folks have come to realize with option and option and Altum is it does buy you a solid year usually, but the fescue does tend to fight its way back from it. But it's still a pretty solid treatment for the sprout year. And then to me, curb is still, at least at the moment, but likely for potentially forever, unfortunately, just because of how hard this grass is to kill. It's still the big hammer in terms of basically being able to hit the reset button and save a field that's been lost. So if you've got a field that's got fescue in it to the extent that you see in these plots, you can maybe plant trees, plow it under and start growing corn, or you can apply curb and turn it back into a blueberry field. When it's solid fescue and those clumps are big, very few herbicides that we have registered are gonna clean that up to a level that's gonna let you farm that land effectively again. So I do think curb is going to continue to be sort of our rescue treatment for fields that have been kind of lost to fescue. But it's going to shift from being the standard treatment to being that treatment that helps you get out of a jam with fescue, rather than being the herbicide that you have to apply all the time when you have fescue. But I want to reiterate, I just want to make it, I feel very strongly that if you've got a situation like you see in this picture, that's a situation that really only curb can can salvage it, in my opinion. I know it's expensive, but the way to keep the cost of curb low is to treat small infestations in fields before they spread. So if you got a 20-acre field and an acre is full of fescue, just treat that acre before the whole field's full, and then you're only paying for an acre of curb, right? I kind of said this in a podcast, and I'll kind of say it now, is I view fescue like fire. So, if you walked into your kitchen and there was a little fire started in the garbage can in the corner, would you say, the hell with it? That fire's only in the corner there. It's not even worth putting it out until at least, the whole kitchen's on fire or the whole first floor is on fire. Most of us wouldn't do that. So when you see fire, you put it out when it's in your house. And I treat fescue the same way. So when you see it in a blueberry field, you got to put that fire out, or else it's going to spread. And then when you spread the seeds, you're just spreading sparks that start new fires. So it spreads fast. And the way to keep the cost of curb down on a per field basis is to take out those small infestations before they spread, and you get hit with a really big herbicide bill at that point.
Yep. So I think this topic has hit a nerve with the growers, and we got a lot of questions that filtered in there. I think the Casperon one, I think we'll cover it on the next slide here. The chemicals to suppress fescue in the crop year, it's something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation there. As far as spot spray treatments on larger plants, I don't know if you've done any spot treatments, but I don't think we have anything in the toolboxes that would be adequate for a spot spray for those areas.
Curb.
I would be looking like Casperon or curb as those kind of smaller area kind of treatment things.
Yeah,
and then
you could consider glyphosate if you wanted to, but I mean, you have to completely drown those clumps in Roundup in order to kill them, and even then you probably won't, to be honest. And that amount of coverage, the blueberries within that vicinity are toast. And that much glyphosate, there's even a chance you'll get soil activity, in my opinion, if it sticks to the organic matter. It's going to be hard on the blueberries, and I've seen, I haven't done it myself, but I've seen clumps of grass where somebody sprayed the whole thing, and you can still see wedges of green where they missed. Like, if you don't hit it, it's not going to be controlled. I personally don't think a clump of fescue moves a lot of herbicide between tillers, so you got to get really good coverage. So it's tough to control with a spot spray unless you're spot spraying with something that works. And I do know a grower that did several acres spot spraying with curb and saved a lot of money, just going where the fescue was, but he had the time to do it. So other than that, I mean, I would spot spray with curb or Casperon to answer that question. Yeah.
Okay. And then another one about Velpar option and Ultim together to test any synergy. I've done the Velpar and Ultim together, and I think it does improve things a little bit, and maybe does help out a little bit, but not to the same extent that you're gonna be walking away and not having any fescue issues anymore. But I think that there is a bit of a help there.
If you got Velpar resistance, then all you're going to
yeah.
get on the fescue is the option in Ultim. With that, the Velpar will be basically benign to the fescue. So you'll get the option Ultim suppression, but the Velpar shouldn't have any effect on the fescue. No.
Yeah, and then the final one that's popped in there is the option Ultim that you had in your plots there. Were they pre blueberry plant emergence or post?
Oh yes, yeah. You want to be as ahead of the blueberries as you can. Ultim is a little bit forgiving. I think it's a little more forgiving than Spartan is. So I think if you were walking a field and you saw the odd sprout here and there, my personal opinion is you're probably okay, but you don't want to see 50-60% blueberry emergence. I think you're gonna to get into some problems there. So generally want to be as far ahead of the blueberries as you can. And in my experience here in Nova Scotia, any option Alta might do is always naturally ahead of the blueberries anyway, because the fescue's ready to be sprayed before the blueberries come up anyway. So most of the time by the long weekend of May, most of my fescue sprays would be done because the grass is already starting to try to flower, and you really want to get out before that. So March 15th to 20th is a bad week for me when I got a busy fescue schedule. I guess I'd put it that way. There's a lot of plots getting hit during that week because
May 15th to 20th.
May, what did I say?
You said March, so.
March, yeah. Well,
You're
March,
planning
that's a
ahead.
busy week too, but for different reasons.
That's it. Yeah, so I think we'll move on to the casserole now, and we'll try to
Okay, so
answer the question.
casserole, I found it to kind of run neck and neck with curb in terms of efficacy on fescue. Curb's probably better, to be honest, but casserole has performed well in terms of knocking the fescue back, relative to curb. There you can see the density numbers there highlighted in red. The issue with casserole is it's a granular product that you need to apply about 175 kilograms of it per hectare, so like 80 to 90 per acre, and that's going to run you over $1,000 an acre. So it's not a feasible product to treat a whole blueberry field with. But it is a good spot treatment for fescue, and sort of a way you can use it strategically in my mind is fescue always starts where equipment sits for a few minutes in a field. Always starts there and spreads from there. So those are areas where if you have that same parking pad in a field always, those are places where after crop year, just putting some casserole out. Once you know the square footage and you don't park anywhere else, and you can calculate exactly how much casserole you need, and you can spread it by hand like feeding chickens, or you can get a hand crank applicator that you would use for your lawn for fertilizing and stuff as well. Travis and I are working on a precision ag project there to be able to apply casserole in real time, precise, like with the precision technology. It's hard because it's not a liquid, it's a granular, and that makes it very complicated to do that for precision agriculture, but they are figuring it out. So in the future, we might be able to use that on a larger scale, hopefully, but for now, it's cost prohibitive, but it works. And it's a unique mode of action because the weeds in blueberries have not really been exposed to it before. So treating small patches of fescue with it, or treating designated parking areas in field where you know seeds are falling off of machines, is a pretty strategic use of casserole, I think.
Yeah, and then just to answer the question there about the application timings, I think it's late fall treatment either of your sprout year or your crop year. Like I think you can put it on in the fall either time, but you do want to make sure it's dormant. That's the thing that if things are dormant, you might run the risk of injury. And then the rates is something that you'll have to experiment with maybe a little bit as well too. That's kind of at the top end. We use casserole quite a bit more in cranberries, and they've kind of played around with the product enough and figured out the kind of quirks with it. So it's a bit of a quirky product as well too. So, but I think that parking lot concept or spot treatment concept, I think it's one that kind of works well with what casserole would bring to the table.
Yeah. And it is effective on sheep sorrel as well, and many other weeds. It's quite a broad spectrum herbicide. So it would be a very useful product. It's going to take out more than the fescue on those parking pads, or even just doing a perimeter application to a field or something as well, right? So and then the other product that some folks are using would be the Ignite Chateau mix. If a field's lost, I wouldn't recommend that because I think it's just adding to the inevitable cost of curb in the end. But in my experience, I think Ignite by itself, but also the Ignite tank mixed with Chateau it's a pretty good treatment for killing fescue seedlings and small small tufts, like probably 1 to 2 year old fescue plants, it's pretty good on killing them. And so it's a treatment to me that you might consider once you got fescue on the run. It could be an alternative fall treatment to take out some smaller plants so that you don't have the field drift back towards needing curb again. So that's how I would use it. If fescue's bad, my honest opinion is going to still be bad after you apply that herbicide tank mix is my opinion.
Yeah, and the one that I would think about too is the Ignite, maybe with your Sandbar application first thing in the
Yep.
spring. That's the other
Yep.
thing that it might help you with. If you got that big tuft, you know, the Ignite is maybe gonna take care of some of those leaves for you, and then leave your Sandbar to clean up kind of what's afterwards too. But I've it's something that would, you know, Scott's got a lot more experience with the fescue stuff than what I do.
And then the two new products that would be coming along would be flazosulfuron, which might be available this fall, is a rumbling I'm hearing, but emphasis on the might there. Gavin's the registration expert that I consult with on that. He knows the rules inside and out on how to get stuff registered. I just like playing with them in the field, but it does look like it might be available this fall, but probably, you know, next year. I think it sounds almost like a definite. And then the other product would be clethodim is the active, and that would be the Select that you see on your screen. And it when it becomes available, it will be available under probably a few different trade name products, but Select is what I've been working with to play with that, to test that herbicide initially. Now, where I see both of these fitting, because I do think in 2 years, I think you're going to be able to use both of these, is my opinion, or be very close to it. So you will be using these products unless something really bad happens in the near future. So just an update on them, because these are probably the only two new things that are going to come along for fescue for the next little while. So the flazosulfuron, in my mind, is probably best used as a fall treatment and used in tank mixture with Ignite. So I've had quite a few sites out with this tank mixture, both spring and fall. And I've been fairly consistently impressed with the fescue control that I've been seeing. And I don't have I'm trying to lay off my usual bar graph bombardment here, but I have had some pretty good results where this treatment as a fall treatment has reduced fescue density quite significantly, and that density has stayed low even a year after treatment. So it does look like a very promising alternative fall treatment for fescue. And I'm not going to say it replaces curb, but it'll certainly be a really nice treatment to make sure that you don't have to use curb any more often than is absolutely necessary. So, you know, once a field has been rescued with curb, if you consider that you have option Ultim, you have Ignite or Ignite Chateau to kill some little plants, you have flazosulfuron plus Ignite as a fall treatment, you know, things are starting to line up. So you're having a lot of alternatives to curb to help you keep that from getting bad again. And then the clethodim, I'm trying to be mindful of the time here. Select here, what that's going to give you is basically going to give you the same effect that you get with option. So it's basically going to do for you what option does, and it's going to give you single season suppression of fescue if the results we have tend to be consistent. So it's going to stop the plant from flowering, so reduce flowering tufts, as well as reduce the number of seed heads that you see on the fescue. It's not going to kill the grass outright. It's going to give you the same kind of result that you get with option. Okay, so here's a select plot, which is the clethodim next to post. And you can see there's still green fescue in that select plot, but it's all trapped and hiding underneath the blueberry plants because you're getting that same option effect where you've shut that grass down and stopped it from flowering and stopped it from producing seeds. And for sure, the main, Gavin and I have been meeting with some of the different companies and stuff, and for sure, the major use that we're pushing for for its crop year for select right now. Gavin, you can jump in if you want because you're the registration fella, but for sure it's useless to us as a sprout year treatment. So we are pushing pretty hard to have it available as a crop year treatment.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one that I haven't had the personal experience with it like Scott, but I'm hoping to sneak out some trials this year and just to verify what Scott's seeing, and then get something kind of in the registration system to try to add that there. I think it's going to be a good kind of tool in the toolbox as well too, but it is one that we do need to get it through the system before we can start using it in fields too, though. So it's something to keep in mind that down the road.
Yeah, it's not there yet, but it's certainly, it's another group one. So it looks very promising that it should become available for use. Okay. And that's, just before we get off that, I mean, that's the bottleneck that we've hit in terms of reducing curb uses. There's nothing else for the crop here, right? So that's the ticket to getting out of this, the curb trap, so to speak, because there's nothing else for the crop year, and that's where clethodim is going to help us, because it gives you something alternative to curb for the crop year, and you can potentially do a whole 2-year cycle without using curb if you have moderate fescue in the field or something. So so some things that you can sort of go stay home and do, just a bit of an update or addition from what I mentioned sort of last fall. To me, assess fescue populations in your own fields, and make herbicide decisions based on the level of infestation and tough size. So trust your gut and trust your experience. If it looks bad, it probably is bad, and if it's really bad, I won't recommend anything but curb for a really severe fescue infestation, because I'm pretty sure you'll be happy with the results. Maybe just not so much with the price, I guess. But you certainly seek advice on possible alternatives if you think it's going to be feasible for your land. But if it's bad and you know it, you know what to do. Okay. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely always do your best to routinely clean all machinery after use in fields where fescue has gone to seed. Okay, this is analogous to us all having to wear masks, wash our hands, social distance, and everything right now. You see how effective it's been in the Maritimes for reducing the amount of COVID-19 that we have in this region relative to other places that don't follow those rules. And cleaning machinery is the mask for fescue. It's the way that you keep that damn stuff from spreading. And it's just something that we got to find a way to be able to do, because again, it's going to win if we just keep spreading it around, because we're going to get resistance, and when it starts spreading, it's going to spread fast. So please try to clean machinery if it's been in fields where fescue's gone to seed. To reduce your cost of curb, treat small infestations before they spread across the field. Designate specific field areas for parking or storage of machinery, and consider casseron in those areas to sort of reduce any new weeds that pop up there. And just keep in mind that, new treatments are coming. So it's been a long haul, a slog, if you will, with fescue. But that's the way it goes when you're dealing with a weed that nothing kills. So it takes a long time to wear it down, but I think we're getting there.
Yep. So I know that there was lots of questions that came up as we were going through there, but if you guys have any kind of last questions on fescue, this is the time to put them in there, or else you can always reach out to one of us afterwards too. We're more than willing to do that there. But I think in the interest of time, to try to get us done by 8:30, we're going to have to pick up the pace here a little bit. So
yeah, I'm gonna have to keep moving. We'll make up some space with tickle grass and panicum there. But narrow leaf goldenrod, just a quick note, that's the most common goldenrod now, and it is quite prevalent in Nova Scotia. So in my experience now, if you have a goldenrod problem, it's probably a narrow leaf goldenrod problem. The Canada and the other species don't seem to be nearly as common, and you can see the numbers there. It has sort of decreased in response to Velpar and then has increased, and so there's likely a little bit of a resistance issue happening there as well. The two main things I'm going to comment on and focus on is targeting goldenrod early in the spring, as well as targeting it in the fall. And so goldenrod, we've been doing some emergence data on it, and it is an early riser in the spring, so to speak. So 60% of the shoots are up out of the ground before the blueberries emerge, and about 90% emergence is happening by late May. So one comment I would make is I would be less worried about this, how tall the shoots are when you're thinking about a Callisto application, and be more so worried about what percent emergence you're at. So I would say for sure with this goldenrod species, you don't want to be doing a Callisto application any later than the first week of June, in my opinion, because it gets too big for a Callisto very quickly. And if most of your shoots are up out of the ground by the end of May, then that's when you want to blast that stuff with Callisto, because you're going to hit almost the maximum number of shoots. So and a lot of growers that I talk to, they're usually happier if they go a bit early on the goldenrod than a bit late when it comes to the use of Callisto on it. And then the other thing I'm going to talk about is the fall. If you've watched goldenrods, you'll know they're late flowers. They don't flower until late in the summer, and they do tend to hold their leaves until quite late into the fall, give or take. But, this is a September image, so it's the best one I could find. But you can see they're not even gone to seed yet. They're still just producing flowers. And so they're going to be holding their leaves still for at least a few weeks or so. And so you have opportunity to hit goldenrod in the fall as well. Okay, so those are the two timings that I'm going to talk about. The first is the early season timing, and basically what I've been kind of looking at is some of the early spring herbicides that folks are trying anyway for other weeds to kind of see if they'll help with control of the goldenrod if you come back in with Callisto. And so the herbicides I've been looking at is Spartan, Altum, Ignite, Lawntrell, or Velpar, put out at or just before the timing of blueberry emergence is the timing that I've been doing. And then looking at what happens if you come back in with Callisto or not. What I can tell you right now, in my experience, if you're putting Spartan out for sheep sorrel, it will yellow the goldenrod a bit, but I wouldn't expect much long-term efficacy, so it doesn't seem to help. Altum by itself looks some stunting for a bit, but doesn't hold. And so it's not adding much value. Ignite looks really impressive. It really thins the goldenrod out early, but I found averaged across all sites that even with or without a follow-up Callisto, Velpar before is still better. So it looks good early on, but it's not the best early spring treatment for it. And what I found to date is Lawntrell or Clopyralid or Velpar are the best early spring treatments for goldenrod if you're going to come back in with Callisto, mind you. So this is just some data looking at a control. May Velpar, May Pyralid is what I use, but that's the other Lawntrell product that we have. A June Callisto, a May Velpar followed by June Callisto, and a May Pyralid followed by June Callisto. And you can see at the end of the sprout year, you can see the Lawntrell followed by Callisto or the Velpar followed by Callisto are your two best treatments there. So I just wanted to mention that because we're going to come to hawkweed here very soon, and there's a lot of hawkweed in Nova Scotia, and a lot of growers are considering Lawntrell early in the spring for hawkweed suppression. If you have goldenrod, I think it's going to help with the goldenrod as well, as long as you come back in with Callisto later on. Would be my comment on that. Okay. The other opportunity is fall for goldenrod, and I really think that we should be considering this much more than we already do. You can do a glyphosate wiper in both the fall of the sprout year or fall of the crop year. And then the other active ingredient that I found that works well at this time is dicamba. And I've been using Banville, but it would be Ingenia would be the product that you'd be able to find now. Most of my work's been done in the fall of the crop year because of you're going to mow anyway, so you got a little bit of forgiveness there in terms of what you can play with, because you might get some extra crop tolerance because you're going to prune the field anyway. And so we've basically been going to quite a few fields, go in after harvest and apply Callisto, Lawntrell, Altum, Spartan, Flazosulfuron, Banville, level and then do a wiper application of glyphosate and then see what we get for regrowth the following year. And you can see at this site, we applied all these herbicides on October 14th, 2019. And then you can see the July 2020 goldenrod density there. And you can see where we put the Banville out or where we did the wiper, the density is much lower, right? So translate that out to your real field. You go over the field with a really good wiper application after harvest, but before you mow, you're set up for much more success with Callisto next year in the crop year, because the goldenrod's thinned out and all you're doing with the Callisto is kicking it when it's down and potentially even finishing it off. Okay, so most folks have found the Callisto by itself is not enough when you have a lot of goldenrod, and so do consider those fall timings. I think they help a lot with it. Okay, and I'm going to take a break and turn it over to Mr. Graham.
Okay, so the next one we'll talk about is tickle grass here. I think we'll move on to the next slide there, Scott. So tickle grass, another kind of perennial bunch forming grass. Tickle grass tends to be pretty shallow rooted too, so that's another way that you can see. You can see as the increase has happened from 2001 to 2019 there. This is one that I think maybe it's maybe more common in New Brunswick actually, but you can see what the easiest way to identify this one, the picture on the right hand side there, you see the very large membranous ligule is the giveaway on this one. And then when you click over the next slide there, Scott, you can see it when it's in kind of full flower, and that's the easiest time to kind of find it, because it kind of waves in the wind, and you see it kind of float when that seed head's there. Those seed heads can break off and blow around a little bit. Sometimes tickle grass and witchgrass can look pretty similar, but if you're looking more closely, tickle grass is typically up to your knees, probably the highest it's going to get. It's not that tall when it gets going, and it can be more of a problem in crop year too. It's another one kind of similar to poverty oatgrass, where it tends to get into those bare spots. Velpar typically isn't as effective. I think I mentioned it's got that kind of shallow root system. I think we're just washing the product down later in the season. The tickle grass just kind of grows on top of that herbicide layer there. Simbar has been much better on tickle grass though, and then adding in Ultim to your Velpar can help with that as well too. But honestly, this one's pretty easily managed with our venture post or else option in the sprout year. And if it's getting to be a problem to pick through, I think it's something you worry about. But in a lot of cases, and maybe in the sprout year, maybe it's not something that we should be chasing as hard as what we do sometimes. So I think with that one, we'll move on to the next one, woolly panicum. I think this one we're not going to spend too much time on, but you can see another kind of bunch forming low growing perennial species there. Woolly panicum doesn't get much bigger than what's in that slide there. You can almost see the flower or the seeds kind of showing up on the plants early on there. So really small seeds, really low to the ground, hairy plant as well too. Can within the same family as what your witchgrass would be, but this one just stays pretty low to the ground. Witchgrass tends to get up and grow a lot taller. Honestly, this is not a weed that I run across that often. I'm kind of surprised where it kind of shook out in your ratings here, Scott. So I think maybe it might be something that we're just not seeing as much, and I don't think it's something we should be chasing too hard either. So I think with cowweed, I'll pass it back over to Scott, though he's got a bit more experience with it.
Yeah, so cowweed is certainly a weed that the questions are coming fast and hard on this one the last few years for sure. And like I say, it was in about 44% of the fields that we surveyed. Here you can see that the trends in the numbers since the 80s. And so you can see for the most part, they've all gone up. And so cow wheat's in more fields than it used to be in. It's covering more area of those fields, and the density's up higher than it's been. Cow wheat can be a hard weed to spot in a blueberry field. You got to basically step on it, and then then you see it. Once you get an eye for it, you'll be surprised how much you see. But sort of into July, you'll start to see the sort of the toad flax type flowers, Scrophulariaceae. You'll see those butter and eggs flowers starting to show up. The yellow and the white flowers is a dead giveaway for it, but it's not much taller than the blueberries, and you can see the color of the foliage there. It really blends in with the blueberries quite significantly, but it's just a small annual plant. The reason I think we're seeing some of the issues with it is that it is parasitic, and we think it is forming attachments to the blueberries, and that's where we're seeing some of the yield effects. But I'll kind of get into that here in a few minutes. So what I'm just going to show here is a little bit of data on how we think cowweed is affecting the growth of the blueberries. And then Gavin's done quite a bit of work on how to manage this weed. And so I'm going to turn it over to him to talk about some of the best treatments for it. But here last summer, we tracked cowweed at 10 fields, and you can see the densities here that we were finding in those fields. And just note that that's on a 1/4 meter square basis. So it's 4 times that per square meter. So at least here in Nova Scotia, fields that have cowweed have a lot of cowweed in them. You're looking at hundreds of plants per square meter. It's just a small plant. And so you would be absolutely amazed when you get down into a meter square quadrat and start counting them one by one, how many are crammed in there in a very small amount of space. So the density is very, very high in a lot of the fields where it occurs. And these are some of the effects that we're seeing on the blueberries. So at those 10 fields, what we did is we collected blueberry data in clean blueberry patches that had no weeds in them, and then collected the same data in blueberry patches that had cowweed in them. And what we were finding is 13 to 50%, 57% reduction in blueberry stem density where the cowweed was, 15 to 50% reduction in blueberry stem height, and up to 30% reduction in blueberry stem diameter. So you can see quite a significant drop in the overall growth of the blueberries, which does result in less blueberry biomass per unit area there as well. So a pretty big impact the cowweed has, it seems, on just the general growth of blueberry plants. But then we did this in the crop year, and you can see it's up to a 77% reduction in berry number per stem where there was cowweed as well. Now this is correlation, not causation, because we didn't manipulate things. We just observed what was going on in the field. And the student that helped me with this, she's going to do her graduate work on this weed. So we do plan on understanding this weed a lot better going forward, but it certainly looks like the numbers we got certainly reflect the concerns that you guys as growers have been indicating to me in terms of yield effects and effects on blueberry growth. So I do believe cowweed is a serious weed in blueberries, and I believe it's a weed that needs to be managed to maintain yields. And I just happen to know a guy that knows how to kill it. So I'll turn it over to Gavin.
Yeah, no, I'd echo Scott's comments there as well too. Like it's good to have the numbers behind it, but that's always the kind of stuff that I was kind of suspecting when I was looking at really significant patches of cowweed as well too. That lot thinner blueberry cover, not looking great. So this is just one set of one of the trials that I did, but basically looking at Callisto applications and then option applications both in sprout and crop year. Basically within the sprout year, timing wise didn't really matter with the Callisto early or late application. You're still getting pretty excellent control for that sprout year, but then the plants recover or you get new germination coming when you get into the crop year. So it's not going to be, it's something that you're going to have to come back with repeated treatments. You see the crop year application in Callisto, we didn't spray anything early on, and then we got 95% control after we put the Callisto on. Option was maybe a notch lower than what Callisto would be, but still all right as far as control. I'd label it as suppression, but it was the same thing that you're seeing cowweed come back in the next year. When we start to layer in treatments with crop year applications, that's where we're getting that 95% control, sprout and crop, getting pretty clean fields. And then looking at the tank mix wasn't any better than those single treatments and didn't control into that crop year. Basically, if you need to control cowweed, if you see cowweed, it's basically you got to spray it. So there's no real carryover effect there. We did take yields. We didn't see anything significant on yields on this one either. So that's something to keep in mind that, with Scott's student doing some more work there, that hopefully some more yield data will come out of this. I didn't see any yield benefits or drawbacks, but A couple of the areas were pretty low maintenance areas that the grower didn't really put any of the inputs in on. So I think that's probably part of the reason why, but just something to keep in mind that if you are going to go after cow wheat, you're going to have to go after it every time you see it, basically. So I think we can go
Yeah,
on
and
the
I
next one.
think the biggest issue, just to jump in, is if we're not able to make a crop year Callisto application, that's going to make it really tough to manage cow wheat. And I think that's where it's slipping through.
Yep. So the next one we'll talk about is bunchberry. I think I get this one just because of some of the historical work that we did with Spartan to get that registered. But you can see, you know, the coverage and the density of bunchberry. It's one that you know, if you look hard enough in most fields, you're probably going to find it. I think our treatment option with Spartan has helped that situation out. But you see the white flowers kind of on the left hand side, and then the berries, which is the big issue, that was on the right hand side there. That's really the why we're really chasing this one, just because there is a quality issue there. So as far as control, I do have the fact sheet that's listed there, and that's basically what's on the label information. But we have those two application windows, like I talked about for sheep sorrel with Spartan. So basically, we have that fall timing. You know, 1 to 4 weeks after harvest, you want to get that treatment on before the bunchberry kind of goes red or dies back. That's about 50% green is what we kind of recommend, is try to hit it before then. And then pretty good crop safety in the picture. Below the first point there is just untreated versus a treated area, just to show how effective it can be. We still have that spring timing. It still is on label, but it is a pretty hard timing to try to hit. We want to try to get the bunchberry when it's at that 45-degree angle, but before those white flowers show up. Some fields, some years, that's maybe a 3-day window, maybe a week window, and depending on what the weather conditions are, it's pretty easy to miss that one. So that's where the fall gives you a little bit more flexibility. But if it is something that you've missed or you're not able to get that fall timing on, the spring timing still is an option to come back in there and try to clean it up. But honestly, have a look at the fact sheet. That's probably the best information that you'll have for trying to control bunchberry. So the one that we'll wrap up on as far as the top 10 would be hawkweed. Scott's given this one just because I've had a little bit more experience with it. In the earlier surveys, they were lumping all the hawkweed species together, and I think Scott split them all out individually. And God bless them for doing that, but it's pretty hard to do just because these species hybridize and they mix a little bit. So I tend to kind of just lump them together because I'm a little bit lazy, I guess. But it's one that to see them in the field, it's the kind of yellow dandelion looking flowers for most of them. There is an orange flowered species as well too, but kind of tall flowers, and then the kind of typical aster flowers, and then seed that's wind blown and spreading around, and then you can see the stolons there that form as well too. So it can get to be quite a mat. And then on the next slide, the picture's a little bit better to see the hairy leaves is the other thing to look for with this. Depending on the species, and some are a little bit hairier than others, but in most cases, it's got a pretty good dense coverage of hairs there, and that's maybe where some of our control issues come into play, because you've got those hairs sitting there absorbing the herbicide on us and maybe making it a little bit harder to get a spray on. But basically on the next slide for control, in my single sprays in trials, Launtrell has probably been the one that's been the kind of most consistent. About 60 to 80% control within that year of application is what I'm saying. One application this sprout year. Timing wise, we've played around with timings a little bit with Launtrell as well too, but basically they all come out to be about the same. The earlier applications tend to have better crop safety, but later applications, you kind of stretch that control window out a little bit. So it depends on your situation a little bit on when you're trying to get best control out of it. Simbar's been a little bit less effective, but definitely something to think about in the program. The pre-applications, like your typical pre-emergent sprout, your timings are much better than the fall applications in this case. So you really need to get it on in that small window, and you really do need to use that higher rate. Ignite, similar to the experience with sheep sorrel and fescue, a burn down, but you get some regrowth. And then Ultim, Callisto, and Option have been variable, depending if you start layering with some other things, maybe they'll help. But basically with hawkweed, I think we still need to look at kind of combining a few different treatments and trying to get best control with it. But Lawntrell is the one that I'd kind of start there and then start to put some of those other pieces into the program based off of that. So with that, I think we come to the end of the top 10. I know questions have slowed down and times maybe getting a little bit tighter there. So I think maybe, Scott, we'll just flip through the remaining slides just to give you a kind of quick heads up on maybe some of the other weeds to be looking at. But we could probably
I think I can do it in 2 minutes. We got 2
Okay,
minutes. I think I
get
should
her.
be the lightning round, but okay, less common but currently problematic weeds. So St. John's wort was pretty high in the weed survey. There is no registered treatment for it. So if you're having problems with it, glyphosate's still the most effective active on it, and wiping it is pretty good. Black bulrush was still quite high in the weed survey. And I think it's because a lot of reliance on Callisto that's suppressing it but not killing it, and maybe a little less use of the Altum spot sprays, but surprisingly still a fair amount of it around. The last few years, it's almost like there's been a vetch explosion and in Nova Scotia, and there is quite a bit of it around according to the survey. Boom sprays of Callisto will help with this weed, but if you see those piles of it or mounds of it, spot treat with Lawntrell. As soon as you see the purple flowers, that's your ticket for it. Spreading dog bane is still common as well. What I was going to say here is if you're spraying from a tractor mounted boom, nothing's going to work. So we've tried Callisto option, Callisto plus option, tank mix, Callisto followed by option, option followed by Callisto, 2 Callistos, 3 Callistos, 2 options, you name it. And no matter what you do in the sprout year, it just comes back in the crop year with those types of treatments. And what continues to be the best treatments are Banville or dicamba, so Ingenia and glyphosate. That's what kills it and stops it from coming back the next year. And there are some non-labeled, like non-registered treatments, but there's no sense of getting into them until we get them into the crop. Okay, so I know this is fast, but a couple things to watch in the future. Red fescue. If you have questions about this, please contact us. This is a sort of a newer fescue that's creeping around in Nova Scotia, and it's worse than the other fescue. So if you see a weird grass that you've never seen before, please contact me, because this is one that you don't want to get out of control. Most of the time, if you see it, when it's fully grown, the stems fall over the blueberries like you see here. So it's a kind of a dead giveaway for it. American burnweed is floating around again, or floating around for the first time in Nova Scotia in our survey. It looks like romaine lettuce. So if you walk across your field and it looks like a bunch of lettuce heads are bolting, that's usually American burnweed. And the best treatment for that is Callisto or Callisto plus option when the plants are small, so less than 10 centimeters tall. And then the last one I'm going to mention, and then we are done, is glossy buckthorn. This is a tough nut. It's spread by birds. They eat the berries and then basically crap the seeds out in your blueberry field. It's a very difficult weed to control, and it showed up in the survey for the first time. And I noticed it a lot in resting fields that aren't being mowed or managed. This is a really tough shrub to control, and these are a couple of shrubs from a field, and this is the regrowth that you get in one cycle. So these plants were mowed off to start the sprout year, and then you can see what you get within 2 years of growth by the time you come back to harvest. This is a very aggressive shrub that spreads very aggressively and is tolerant to a lot of herbicides. So this is one to watch for, because it can become a pretty significant issue. Okay, so I want to thank WB PANS and NSERC for allowing me to have the resources to do this work. Without those two, right now I wouldn't be busy, I guess. And then I'll just leave it here with my name and Gavin's name, and Gavin wants to end with a comment on the IPM guide.
Oh no, it's just that if you got any questions on the chemical treatments, that's still the one to go through to answer some of the questions, and then a little bit of the background information. One question that popped up there about burning being effective For weed control, I think we haven't really given burning the full due as far as the weed control side of things, but I think it can, depending on the species that you're going after, it might help. But honestly, I think burning's getting to be hard to do, so it's a bit of a balance there to do that. And then question about sharing the presentation, that was answered there, that the recording's going to be shared there, but feel free to reach out to Scott or myself too if you've got any questions on this down the road. You know, we're both pretty easygoing and easy to talk about this, and really interested in to get your guys' feedback on what's working, what's not working for you guys as well too, especially, you know, these top 10 weeds are the ones that we're dealing with a lot. And if you guys got any advice or recommendations or where you want to see trial work go, feel free to reach out to either of us. We're, you know, pretty easy going that way.
There's a lawn trail timing one there, but we are out of time.
Yeah, that's
Valpar
great
timing, pretty
information,
much
though.
sum it up.
Yeah, as far as the lawn trail timing, yeah, no, that would be the time that I'd be looking at. It's probably the best one.
All
So
right,
Gavin and
thank
Scott,
you.
you're okay if we share your presentation with some of the growers that have requested it then?
Oh, please do.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
All right, any last questions for Scott or Gavin? It's really good information, so I really appreciate your guys' time tonight.
Excellent,
Yeah, no problem.
guys.
All right, so our last speaker tonight is Eric Richter with Syngenta Canada. So I will give the floor to you, Eric.
Well, good evening. Thanks, Megan. I will set up here to share the presentation. Okay, there it is there. And sharing screen. Megan, Terry, what can you see there?
Looks good.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you and I can see it full screen.
Perfect, yeah.
I'll minimize this and get this off to the side. There we go. Well, last presentation of the evening. Again, I'd just like to start off by saying a thank you to the Truro AgriMart team, to Terry and Megan and Rebecca in particular, putting things together. And I did send a copy of the presentation as a PDF to Terry, so Truro team has this presentation if someone would like a copy of it. I've only got about, I think 17 or 19, somewhere in 17 to 19 slides, just talking about the Lowbush blueberry story from a Syngenta perspective, but it was very encouraging to listen to David in terms of riding the wave. That's what Terry and I talked about. I started here in the Maritimes in the fall of 18. I live on the island. I'm the territory rep here for Prince Edward Island in Nova Scotia. And, you know, I feel a little bit like I've abandoned Nova Scotia. I apologize. It's been a little bit of a challenge, of course, as it is for many people working in the new environment right now, but truly looking to see the maritime bubble getting opened up again. So, but in terms of the presentation this evening, I'd just like to highlight, we've got 6 fungicides that are registered for wild blueberry growers, and then 2 herbicides. And certainly from a herbicide perspective, listening to Scott and Gavin, wow, it makes the annual crops look easy. But certainly growing the best crop is all about managing your pests and diseases, weeds included. And hopefully with the help of some of the Syngenta products, you can take a crack at 2021 and having a solid year, and hopefully those prices come together at the end of the season. So let me advance it. Uh-oh. Hang on one sec. I tried to advance my screen, but page down, it's frozen.
You could try maybe unsharing and resharing. That might work.
Okay. We'll do that again. And then I know my iPad was getting warm. Let's see if I can. There it is there. Share screen. And what's it? Is it showing now the main slide again?
And no, it's showing up to, oh, now it's showing the main slide. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. There it is. Thanks, Megan.
No problem.
So what I wanted to just cover in terms of, as I talk about the specific Syngenta products, really the big four, talked about this one before for many of the veteran growers, you know, Septoria and Valdissinia, Rust and Monolinea. Those are the big threats with the perennial crop. And this, of course, came from New Brunswick. I did cut off some of them, but as you highlight those four major diseases in Nova Scotia, in New Brunswick, and also on the island, of course, they're either moderate to high pressure, and certainly for growers who need to make sure, whether it's in the sprout year or in the fruit year, that those diseases are on the radar. So leaf rust, of course, everybody has a sense of what those symptoms look like. Again, even with the dry weather in some areas, rust quite prevalent in 2020. And the product that I wanted to mention, it's a newer product, is Aprovia. I'll talk a little bit about the active here in a minute, but we can apply it in terms of preventative or a proactive approach, layering it on the top of the leaf. We do have some curative ability, and really it stops the germination of the spore and growth of the mycelia. But once it's infected the full leaf and we've got lesions, it will stop it, but some of that damage, of course, is done. In terms of the active, I mentioned it's solatinol. It's in a group 7. Our targeted diseases mentioned here earlier, just in the other slide, was rust, leaf rust, but we're also picking up suppression on Valdissinia leaf spot, two of the major diseases. Now, in terms of the applications, we're sliding towards the latter part of the summer in the sprout year only. You can see as we compare against some of our other products, chlorothalonil or Bravo, we do give control in the sprout year. The other two products, of course, would be, as I mentioned, Bravo and Quilt. They also give us protection against leaf rust. Septoria, a big one, no matter where you are, this one here can really knock back your stands and health and vigor of the crop. But, you know, whether it be the leaf symptoms or the stem lesions, it's very evident. And for the Syngenta portfolio, we still have two products, Bravo and Quilt. And certainly you need to work with your processor or end buyer to make sure that those fungicides are acceptable in terms of application in the sprout year. But as they say, this disease, Septoria and stem canker, is quite prevalent, and we do have some options for growers in managing this disease. Valdissinia, some good pictures here that came through from New Brunswick. But in terms of Valdissinia leaf spot, I mentioned earlier about Aprovia or solatinol, we get suppression on it along with Bravo, Quilt, and Allegro. So there's a good combination of actives here that growers can use in the sprout year and in the fruit year to manage Valdissinia. Monolinea, again, some excellent slides here. Certainly prevalent in terms of the fruit year. We've got Inspire Super, and I'm not sure how many growers are familiar with this, but one of the things, and I'll show this later, we have a portfolio sheet that outlines all of the products. Terry's got some. The team at the Truro Agrimart have these portfolio sheets, but Inspire Super is labeled, and we have MRLs in Europe and also for Japan. It's got monolinea on the label, and it also includes, you can see here, listing with anthracnose, alternaria, and botrytis. The rust is suppression, but a fairly broad label in terms of disease control and suppression. Two actives, group 3 and group 9, used in the fruiting year. So there's our summary of the products for monolinea. Of course, the main focus here is in the fruit year. I mentioned Inspire Super. We've also got Switch, which provides control. Quilt is there, labeled still for monolinea, as is Allegro, only suppression in the fruit year with Allegro. Botrytis and anthracnose, certainly growers that have used Switch before, quite effective on these two diseases. And what's really good with this is we've got that 1-day pre-harvest interval. And so botrytis, we've got two products that I mentioned, the Switch and then the newer product, Inspire Super, but both providing control in that fruit year. And where I wanted to finish a little bit is we're committed to bringing forward new products for wild blueberry growers. We've got a new active. I mentioned this briefly 2 years ago. We're closer. We have now one version that is registered in Canada. We're working at the MRLs, but we're targeting, in particular, we're targeting septoria and rust in the sprout year. It's also a group 7, but a very different active from the selatinol. It's called the Dept, and it's part of the carboxamide family. And as they say, we are trying to bring forward a different active and mode of action around septoria. I think that'll be a truly a welcome addition to the Syngenta portfolio. We do have some options here. As I say, Miravis Neo is registered, and we're trying to do some trialing this season, both in sprout fields, but also on fruit crops, to try to, again, build out the MRLs that we need for you as growers exporting your crop outside the country. The last two here are in the herbicides. I know Scott and Gavin talked a lot about Callisto or mesotrione, group 27. It does have very good crop safety. One of the things that we talked about is splitting the application. It's low use at 120 mils, but I found a lot of growers are actually doing, for example, on goldenrod, they're making a early application and then coming back again, they're cutting that rate in half. So the active per acre is 120, but a split app does seem to be enhancing the control somewhat. It's very evident. You can drive by those fields that have had Callisto applied, and you get that bleaching occurring. And we went through a number of those problematic weeds in the previous presentation, and certainly Callisto still seems to be holding up. There's not much in terms of weed resistance or a genetic shift taking place. But use it in your toolbox along with other products that we talked about, Elantrel and Curb and so on. So try not to overuse it, but it certainly is an effective tool on some of those difficult to control perennial weeds. And the last one, of course, was Venture. As a group 1, we're looking at annual grasses and some of the perennial grasses. It does have very slow kill. That's probably the one question you get the most is, how long is it going to take to knock down some of these grasses? It takes, in fact, weeks, not days. And the other thing, of course, to watch is your pre-harvest interval in the fruit year, which is essentially 2 months or 60 days. So we've got, again, those 6 fungicides: Allegro, Provia, Bravo, Inspire Super, Quilt, and Switch, and the newer products, Provia and Inspire Super, and then the 2 herbicides with Callisto and Venture L to round out the Syngenta portfolio. So I guess Megan and Terry. I'll stop sharing if there's let's see here. Hang on, I'll get it back.
Actually, while you're doing that, I just mentioned, you talked about splitting the Callisto application, and I don't know if Dr. Yarborough is still on, but he done some trial work there a few years back that talked about doing that and adding ammonium sulfate to the mix. And I've had a few growers do that, and they've had very good success in controlling a lot of hard to control weeds like goldenrods and even dogbane to some degree.
You did stop sharing?
Don't think so.
Not yet. Okay. I'm trying to pull that icon up in the corner. There we go.
Yep,
Come on.
got it.
Is it stopped now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, everyone. Appreciate the time again and your business. And if you've got any questions, I'll be glad to do my best to answer those. And there it is.
Megan, do you have any questions in the chat box?
Yeah, one just popped up here. Are there any other sprays? I don't think he finished it there.
For new products, for new products, as they say, we're working with a number of versions with the Mirvis or Adapidin. But until we have the full MRL work done, we can't move those forward into the full commercial. Oh, there's the one, Callisto. Oh, it popped off the screen, sorry.
Yeah, it's back now. Are there any other sprays like Callisto that can be split with 2 applications?
Venture should be a one-shot deal. I'm not sure commenting about other herbicides, but as I say, I really picked that up from growers. In an annual crop production system, we don't recommend that with Callisto. There's 2 rates, 80 and 120 mils. But in terms of blueberries, I have seen that personally with the split app. It does seem to enhance the kill slightly. There was a comment there about a Provia. So
Yes.
we did launch a Provia in 18. It was out there. 19, there was a bit. In 2020, the last season, there was significant acres sprayed. Not much of the product was solo. It was often tank mixed, for example, with Proline. It does have a requirement for a surfactant at 0.2 or 0.125 to 0.2%. And with the hot, dry weather, there was some interaction, what we found with particular clones. And so going forward in 2021, it's still registered. It's there available for growers to use, but we're encouraging you to, one, from a crop safety standpoint, watch temperature, good water volumes, don't tank mix too many things. But in terms of the clones, there's a very low percentage, thankfully, but I think you will potentially see some leaf burn or off color with the high stress environments. Hopefully that answered the question. And in terms of the sprout year, that's really where we're targeting. There is work being done to expand that label, but right now we're targeting the sprout year only.
All right, yeah, I don't see any other questions or further comments.
Well, thanks again. If there's no other questions, appreciate the time again on your agenda. Terry, I'll sign off.
Thank you very much, Eric. We appreciate your contributions. And actually, speaking of that, Syngenta graciously donated 3 $75 gift certificates for attendees this evening. And the 3 successful candidates were David Harrison, Gerard Bowie, and Kevin Welton. So there's 3 gift certificates that will be available for those individuals to put towards their crop inputs this year. Also, I'd like to do a shout out to the meeting we have next Tuesday night from 7 to 8 p.m. It'll be a tag team between LP Consulting and AgriK. So Rick and Lees will be talking about 4 years worth of research they've done on fertilizing blueberry fields and what they've found, and some big changes that they feel that we should be taking a look at in terms of how we fertilize our crops if we're going to get a better yield. So hopefully you can join us. So you'll need to register for that and then get the link. So that's next Tuesday night from 7 to 8 p.m. Anything else, Megan?
No, I don't think so. If anyone misses this CCA code, just let me know and I can email it to anyone that missed it.
If not, we wish you all a great night, and thank you very much for being part of our presentations.